concerned. It must be a sort of a reaction formation, because I have a family where all my children are all the time sitting around with, mobile phones and video and apps and, the whole thing. iPad, iPod. And then they tell me every now and then, of course I know the email, because then I email my friends. But then every now and then they tell me, now this is how you use it, this is how you use it. And just like Matthew was talking just a little earlier, they can go through the whole gamut of it. By the time it's evening, I don't think I'm dementing. And if I am, it doesn't matter too. Now, 3 very eloquent talks. Dr. Matthew, I really enjoyed your talk about the neurology, which cuts down some amount of the things that I wanted to say. So I was in a bit of a dilemma sitting, should I talk, because talking is in the area of concepts, or should I give people a short meditation session sitting where you are, which gives you an experiential feeling of what I'm going to say. So it's up to you to decide what you want, and maybe I'll just give you a few inputs into what I'm going to say and a brief session if you wish. Now, the first thing I wanted to say is, when I came in here and people were talking about icons, which we are constantly talking about in life, I was looking back and seeing who are my icons. So one of the first that came to my mind was my father. My father was in those days what was called a Gandhian. There was a group of people in those days who believed what Gandhi spoke about and the way he acted, because Gandhi, with all his idiosyncrasies or frailties, believed in something that he followed very assiduously. What he preached, he practiced himself in a very transparent manner. If you look at his books about his experiments with the truth, a lot of people have made fun of it, a lot of people have ridiculed it, but he had the courage to investigate some aspect of himself that he felt needed investigation. Now, my father was a Gandhian of those times. They all grew up with the freedom struggle, and he was a doctor. It was his dream to go and work in the least evolved village of those times. So he searched out and found a place in Tamil Nadu where he went and set up shop, as they called it those days, giving medical health to people. My mother did not much care for this, because her idea was that you've studied so much, why cannot you go live in a city where you have proper facilities and where you can make some decent money? She was not after big money, but decent money, because he would sit up the whole night helping somebody with a delivery, a forceps delivery, and in the morning they would give him a banana or an orange or whatever they could afford. Now, life was tough for them, but I don't remember a time when any of us felt deprived. There was a sense of great satisfaction that he had. The home was a very contented place, in spite of all the difficulties which I now look back and think he must have faced. Because he was so passionate about what he wanted to do, the truth of what he thought was something within himself that he needed to follow. Years later, when I came to psychiatry, at NIMHANS, Dr. Surya was the director. And Dr. Surya, at one time, sitting in a meeting, like in a big meeting what a director sits in, he thought to himself, this is what he said, because we used to call him to give us guest lectures. And he said, I wonder what I'm doing here. This is not what I'm looking for. And then he wrote to the central government, because at that time I think Nimhans had a lot to do with the central government. It was a central government organization. So he wrote to the central government and said, get me a post anywhere else. I don't want to be a director. So they looked around and they found this place in Pondicherry where there was, because he had to go only to another central government institute. He went to Pondicherry and the only post that was open was a lecturer's post. Now, I don't know how many people who are directors would opt to go for a lecturer's post, which at that time was one of the lowest. Dr. Surya went. Dr. Surya went and he was tremendously happy. He found out a lot about himself, which he came and shared with us. I remember that when he used to come and give lectures in Nimhans, a lot of people would laugh because he had a tremendous sense of humor. But a lot of people also thought that he was a bit that came from inside, meant a lot, which would mean a lot to some of us who were growing older. And then the other person I met was Dr. R.M. Verma, who was another director of Nimhans. While he was midway through being the director of Nimhans, he was called by the central government to take on the job of Deputy Director of Health Services, which was a very big job those days. I suppose it still is. Well, he went there and he worked for, I don't know, some time. And then there was a political movement where another person had to be appreciated because that person was very useful to a politician. And overnight, when Dr. Verma came in the morning to the office, he saw his board was gone. Somebody else was reinstated, and he got this information from the man standing, the pew, the security guard. Now he came back and continued his practice. He was a neurosurgeon. Now, never in all my life, and I've known him for about 35 years, have I ever seen Dr. Verma saying one negative statement. I won't even talk about malicious, I'm talking about negative. He is so full of life, he is so enthusiastic. And these are the people that I'm looking at as I was growing up and trying to see what is it that they have found. It's not fame, it's not a position, it's not wealth, but there's something else that they have found, and that perhaps was what turned me on my journey into the spiritual dimension. Now I went to my guru. At that time I was working in KC General Hospital, the urban wing of Nimhans. And when I went there to him, I said, let me give you a short CV, because we are so used to this in meetings. Even now you heard this being read. I said, I started. He said, it's not necessary. You're here because you are meant to be here, and let's start what you want to do. And that was the end of my thinking in terms of CVs and biodatas. Later on, I realized the CVs and biodatas that we have are our own personas for a certain purpose. They are not bad. They are there for a purpose. But when you start identifying with this to the exclusion of everything else, then as you grow older and that CV falls away, then disappointment sets in. It didn't happen with Dr. Verma. It didn't happen with my father. It didn't happen with Dr. Surya. So perhaps they had something different. Now, at one time I was going to the United States and I had to get my visa from Madras. And those days, Chennai as it is called now. Those days, if anybody remembers, if you go for a visa, you have to stand in a line, and people would put their blankets the previous night. Now I was staying somewhere in Mylapore, and somebody I knew, an uncle of mine, said, I know a very good auto rickshaw driver. He'll take you there in the middle of the night and you can stand there. As it happened, I went to the auto rickshaw stand. He took me there. And the auto rickshaw man that he had expected wasn't there. There was another man. So he hummed and hawed, how will I send you alone? And I said, I'll manage, don't worry, because I didn't want this old man to come with me. And I got into the auto. It transpired that the man was drunk, the auto rickshaw. So I had a full tour of Chennai, and then we were going this way, that way, scraping past buses. At one time, I was afraid to say something to him in case it got worse. So I said, Appa, do you think you can go a bit slower? I said. He said, I am not afraid of going fast. I said, you're not, but I am a little afraid. So he said to me, you don't believe in God, is it? I said, I do. And then he said, well, if you believe in God, what are you afraid of? And this was a man who was drunk up to here and going this way, that way. And I said to myself, hey, that's something I have to reflect upon. Do I really believe in God? The point is, I might go to a temple, I might go to a church, I might say my prayers, I might on a platform say I do believe in God, but do I really have enough faith? And that comes to something that Dr. Matthew was talking about so eloquently, about the favorite hymn of Gandhiji, Lead Kindly Light. O Lord, who changes not, abide with me. So when I went back to some of my spiritual practices under guidance, and which were tough guidance, because when I went to there, the first thing was, he didn't teach me asana, pranayama. He said, go and water the lawn. So I had to water the lawn and then the garden, and I had to do it for about 6 to 7 months. During which time, I was wondering, why are people doing asanas? People are doing meditation, and here I am watering the garden. And I think that here I am a psychiatrist, and I've been counseling people. I know all about psychotherapy. I've gone through a training in psychotherapy. What am I doing here watering the garden? I would get restless. I would think that I've got in the wrong place and maybe I should leave. I would think maybe he's trying to take advantage and he wants me to stay there. There were many, many thoughts. But for some strange reason I stayed. And by the end of 3 to 4 months, I started feeling a tremendous calmness, a contentment. I wouldn't call it happiness, contentment. And then I started feeling very energized, full of life. At the end of 5 months, my guru called me and he said, so what did you experience? I said, I don't know. When I came, I was very cynical, but now I feel a lot of energy. And he said, why do you think that is so? I said, I don't know. He said, you are working with plants and with the water. This is your first lesson in pranayama. That we all share the same prana. We share the same life force with everything around animals, birds, trees, the soil, the fire, the waters. And somewhere along the way, perhaps with the industrial age, we started thinking of all these as things. You know, the water, the earth, the ecology, everything was something that we wanted to give us conveniences and better life. So they became things. And when we started thinking of these as things, we started thinking of people as things. She is there to make me comfortable. He is there to make me comfortable. My children are there to listen to my ideologies and follow it. So one day when I was sitting in front of my guru, somebody asked him, how can you be detached and bring up your children affectionately? How can you have both? So he said, now imagine that your best friend tells you, I'm going to England for about 2 years, can you look after my children? You take care of them better than you take care of your own children. You love them, you nurture them, nourish them. But when your friend comes back, you don't say that this child has to follow my ideology, this child has to follow my religion, this child has to follow the career I think is best for him, the financial options that are best for him, because I care. It comes from caring. So I said, that's a point. Then he said, why don't you think that your children are given to you by your best friend, and that is God? So you do your best. Detachment is not indifference. Detachment is detaching our own expectations from that particular action that we do. I also learned from many people that I came across. One was one of my servants at home, a maid. She still comes. One day she came looking a bit glum. Usually comes she very cheerfully. She came looking a bit glum. And I looked at her and I wondered what was the matter. She went inside and she came back with a smile when she took her tea. So I said, what happened to you today? And she said, oh, nothing, the usual. I said, what do you mean the usual? She said, you know, I said something irritating and my husband gave me a hit. And then she told me about how he drinks every night and every now and then she gets beaten up. And I felt so sorry for her. And I looked at her and I said, in spite of that, you come every day and you do the work here. You know, so many of us say we are not in a mood because we are upset. We don't want to do this job. We don't want to do that job. It didn't deter her. This is an icon to me. Then there is another servant of mine who, a very old person who's not here anymore. She put all her money into a chit fund. And then the man, whoever the chit fund person was, walked off with it. And I was horrified. She came, she was telling me with a giggle. I said, what will you do? I said, aren't you worried? She said, no, Ma. If that money comes, money goes. Nothing is there that you have to bother about. God will take care. Now that is an icon. We can always find icons everywhere provided we are looking for them. And what are they? What are these icons? At those moments, it is the divine that speaks through them. So what do I mean about divine? This is a country, and not only India, the whole of the East, I would say, the Arab provinces, Thailand, Burma, all these places had a great tradition where people would leave their jobs. They would be kings, they could be cobblers, teachers, healers, and they would all go to people who were wise, not the strong man, the wise man. And some of them would give up what they were doing and they would sit 40,000 at a time, 60,000 with the Buddha, 40,000 with Mahavira, with the sages, the kings would go. And what would they go? They were not going just to sit and pray to them or do puja or to ask them to make them better. They wanted to know, what is this thing called the truth? What is this thing that makes you different from me? You are contented in spite of everything, and here I am getting upset about every little thing. So these people, having done this tremendous amount of research, and if we go back into the Shastras or the scientific texts, you will find a tremendous amount of research into the mind, the emotions, the feelings, how do you deal with them, which emotions are to be satisfied immediately, which are to be, which cannot be gratified immediately, which you can learn from somebody else. All these were experiential aspects of the spiritual sciences. People did not just open their mouths and say a few platitudes. And all these people, these sages of the past, and in the sages of the past, remember, I'm talking about all the scientists who worked in these fields in every religion, what we call religion today, whether it was Jesus, whether it was Muhammad, whether it was Guru Nanak, whether it was the rishis, they left behind what is called archetypes. Archetypes are images in the mind, in the unconscious mind, which contain a tremendous amount of power in them. They are like bijas, they are like seeds. You can tune into that. It's like a password into a computer website. You can tune into that particular website through the password, and you have a whole range of experiences that will move you towards what we call as a truth. So what is this that we call truth? Some people call the truth as Allah, some people call it God, some people Father, Rama, Krishna. It doesn't matter what name you give, but what is the truth? The truth that every single mystic of every faith has said is that which was, which is, and will always be there. That's something which is eternal, unchangeable. And there is that part of that unchangeable eternal self within each person. And we start aging the minute we are born, as Dr. Matthew was saying. So when do we start learning how to deal with aging gracefully? We start from the time we are children. We start when the children are toddlers, when they are walking and they fall down. How do we react to it? You can look at it and say, oh, how terrible, what a sad thing to do, ayyo, and you think a child learns to cry all his life. Unless it's a major hit. If it's a small fall, why can't you just clap your hands and laugh? The child will laugh with you, and the child will learn to laugh when something difficult goes. And this is how grace is inbuilt into the human system. Now, as you grow older, you must remember the brain has this capacity to remember the negative things. That's what somebody was talking about. It's true. Why? Because as evolution happened, the brain needed to remember the negative things for survival. You go out there and there is a predator, you have to remember that so you don't go there next time. But nice things don't always have to be remembered, because the positive things, it's always there. You have a fruit tree, you can go there, take it. So it's the quality of the brain to remember something negative because it's for our protection, for survival. Now you have to go beyond matter. The brain is matter too. And we have to change that particular mode of thinking and start seeing something positive in everything. Every faith gives you that particular clue. They say think positive. Why? Santosha, Sukha. Everybody will tell you. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna will tell Arjuna, why are you so depressed? What's happened to you? And here was Arjuna, who was a very great warrior. When you see stories that we read them as stories. We have to reflect on them. Parables are archetypes. Zen koans are archetypes. Yantras are archetypes. You go on reflecting and reflecting and reflecting on them, meditating on them. Somewhere or the other, the consciousness changes and something else happens to you, and you realize that there is something that gives you a sense of contentment in the most simple of things. Now, as it is time and I don't want to take much more, let me end with just one little story, and then if you wish I can give you a 10-minute session in meditation, sitting where you are, if you wish. Now, first of all, in all religious texts, Jesus will say, seek ye first the kingdom of heaven, and all else will be added unto you. Why? Because look for that something which is unchanging. Then enjoy what is changing. Nobody says don't enjoy. Look for something else first and then enjoy what you have, because when these things go away, that will always be there. So to find the truth, they give us 2 or 3 little clues. They say dhanam, giving away. Jesus will say, cast your bread upon the waters and it will come back 1,000-fold. Now, what happens is, and is a very important word there. A lot of people will change it to sow. You know, you cast, it's going to come back anyway. So you give it to your servant, she will come regularly. You give it to your family members, they will stand by you. You give it to your friends, they will be there. No, that's not what he is saying. He is saying, cast your bread upon the waters. Don't think. In the Islamic tradition, they have one of the pillars of Islam is zakat. Zakat is you give a certain amount but of your regular earnings, but you don't give it to your family and friends. You give it to X from somebody that you don't get anything out of. So it is not vyapara. What is not business is dhanam. The giver feels good. You feel so happy when you give. When you do that, then you start realizing, these are scientific aspects. You start realizing that, hey, it feels nice to give, let me give some more, let me give some more. you start feeling good. Dhanam is one. Dhyanam is another. Dhyanam is reflection on things. Now, whatever we are told when we are children, to a large extent we reflect on it. We have a story about a lady called Kaikesi who used to all the time point to her stepson who used to go in this is a Puranic story, Kubera, would go in a chariot. And she would always call her son to her and she would say, see, that's your stepbrother, he's got a chariot, you don't have that. Did your dad give you a car? Did he give you a BMW? Look at what we are, ask ourselves, what are we telling our children? And that put the seed of jealousy in the person called Ravana, who later on was so brilliant in so many fields, but he was jealous, and because of the jealousy he couldn't handle his sense gratification. There was a lady called Gandhari in the Mahabharata. Gandhari's husband was born blind. She covered her eyes because she said, I will not see anything that my husband cannot see. So it's said to be a great act of chastity. She had 100 sons. They all went haywire because neither the father nor the mother knew what was happening. And they had so much love for their children because they couldn't see, you see. So the children were overcompensated by giving them whatever they wanted. And this led to the major Kurukshetra war where you had millions of people slaughtered. And it didn't start with Dhritarashtra, the father or the mother. It started much before that with Bhishma. Bhishma was a young man, very erudite, trained by many great sages to take over the kingdom of India and to govern it with justice and fair play. What did he do? His father, who was the king, fell in love with a fisherwoman. And the father was in depression, actually. So the son came to know, he went to the fisherwoman and he said, listen, I don't want my father to be upset. Why don't you marry him? So the woman's father said, I wouldn't mind, but there's one condition, her son has to be the king. So Bhishma, he said, that's fine. He loved his father so much. He said, that's fine. I don't want the kingdom. I'll give it to the child. So they said, that's okay for you to say. What about your children? When you have children, they'll fight over property. So he said, I won't get married. That's a promise. And he remained unmarried all his life. He was one of the last to die in the Mahabharata war. And a lot of people see him as having been a great self-sacrifice model. He wasn't, because he gave away what did not belong to him. The kingdom did not belong to him, you see. You can only give away what belongs to you. It is like a politician today saying, oh, it's okay, I'll give my son that, I'll give him this. After all, I'm also putting a golden throne in Tirupati, so what? Then you end up counting bars, because this is not because of what you did alone, but what have you transmitted to the next generation. This is what we have to remember. This morning when we were coming, we saw 3 children. One must have been 14, driving a scooter with 2 younger children sitting behind. And they are driving on the wrong side of the road to top it and going around. And we were saying, what happens to the parents? The parents, sometimes, you would say in some situations parents don't know. But I know many situations where parents are saying, wow, what an achievement. My son can drive at the age of 12. No, these are values. What are the values we are giving them to ruminate upon? Dhyana. We are saying it's okay to break a particular rule so long as it is convenient to you. And the Shastra says there are 2 ways of acting, Shreyas and Preyas. Shreyas is doing what is right according to the truth, what doesn't disturb the other's consciousness. Preyas is you do something that is enjoyable, but more than that, it is convenient. So these are the things that we have to think about constantly. And this is what the people of those days, they just didn't go sit there and meditate. They had to search within themselves. And the searching can be painful because nobody wants to seem imperfect. And that is the tapas. So the day you have to do dhanam, give away, then you start feeling better. When you start feeling better, you can handle the tapas, the struggle of letting go of power, letting go of ideology if need be, if it is damaging. Why hold on to an ideology which can hurt you or hurt the other person? Letting go. Then that is tapas. Then tyaga is true self-sacrifice. He needs and I need, but I have enough, so why can't I give him? It need not be in material. It can also be a thought, a care. Just pray for him silently. This tyaga. And eventually dhyana. What is it that you are ruminating upon? These are the 4 steps they say. Dhanam, tyagam, tapas, because we struggle with ourselves, the inner war, and the dhyana. So let us reflect on these things. And a lot of people today I've heard saying that the youngsters have no respect for elders. The youngsters don't care enough, they are so tied up with their machines. I'm going to ask you to go back home and think, who is responsible for that? How did you treat your parents? Were you there when your children wanted you? What were you telling your children? Did anybody, I'm not talking of this group, I'm saying in general, this is how it has been. Not that it's right or wrong, it's a lesson to learn. We have always told the children, study well, get good marks, get a good job, and do well. Did we ever say to the children, I want you to learn to care for the other person? Was that given so much importance? I want you to learn to be honest, even though you might get hit by the world. Because today children will tell you, you must be stupid to say such a thing. Because unless you play some game, you cannot. Now the point is, a lot of people will say, okay, you are spiritual, so what does God give you? Let me end with the story of Job, which some of you know. In the Quran, he is called Ayub, because they have a common past. Now, Job or Ayub was a person who had a lot of wealth, cattle, very rich man, children, happy, everything was there, and he was also very devout. So then the, what they call the devil, or what I'm talking inside, is your own ego-oriented mind. Says, now if you remove all this from this man, is he still going to be devout? Maybe he's praying only so that he can keep all this, because we find this in society. So then all this was taken away from him. That is, some thieves came, took away some camels, something, cyclone or something came, took away the camels and the sheep, and the land went, and his children died because a building collapsed. And eventually he was left all alone. And his friends deserted him, the people he thought were friends. And then the inner mind said, if you take all this away from him, it's okay. He still has his body, he is healthy. While you are healthy, you feel you can do anything. And so the test was put that he had boils all over his body, so decrepit he could hardly move. And his wife was the only one who sat and looked after him. After some years, he had become almost like a crumpled sort of person. And this material ego whispered in her mind, how long are you going to sit and suffer like this? Why don't you tell your husband to ask God to help him out? So what did she do? She went and told him, how long are you going to put up with this? Why don't you pray to your God that you've been praying so many days? And he said, how many years did we live in happiness and luxury and wealth? She said 80 years. And how many years am I suffering like this? She said 7 years. He said, when I was doing well, I never asked God, why me? Now when I'm doing badly, why should I ask him? He is not my insurance agent, you know. So, and there are many stories. These are stories, if we want, we can look. This country is teeming with stories. You stumble over a pebble and somebody will say there is a story over it. But the point is, all these are there in our culture, in our heritage, this tremendous amount of resilience, fearlessness, dignity, that you can do what you think is the right thing. All this is there because we have a diverse society and there is no regimentation. The negative effect is that there are no rules, everybody drives any side of the road. But the positive aspect is that because there's no regimentation, we have the capacity to take from inside us that something which we can move towards the truth. So, I'll conclude here because I see the time is going on. Close your eyes for just 10 minutes. Where you are sitting, close your eyes. If you are wearing glasses, take them off. Close your eyes. Take a deep breath in and out. And just for these few 10 minutes, let your tensions, your distractions, your worries move out with your exhaled breath from the top of your head out through the tips of your toes. Listen to the sounds that you might hear around you. Just be aware of the sounds. Don't try to understand, analyze, cling to them, fight with them. Simply be a witness. Then bring your attention within the room. Be aware of the person sitting next to you. Awareness of your own breath, the breath of your neighbor. And bring your attention to your physical body sitting still and steady. As I name the parts of your body, take your attention to each part. Don't try to relax that part of your body, just let it relax on your own. Take your attention to the top of your head. We only look at the body when there is pain, but now look at each part as a blessing, as a gift. The top of your head, your forehead, right eyebrow, left eyebrow, eyebrow center. Right eye, left eye. Nose, tip of the nose, upper lip, lower lip, chin. Front of the neck, front of the chest, front of the abdomen. Right shoulder all the way down to the fingers, left shoulder all the way down to your fingers. Right hip, left hip. Right thigh, knee, lower leg, right foot and your toes, left thigh, knee, calf muscle, your foot and your toes. The back of your body, up the back of the right leg, up the back of the left leg, lower back, middle back, upper back. Become aware of your whole body, the whole body, the whole body, which is not just one unit. It's trillions and trillions of cells, each one like a city in its own, with a canteen, with a police station, with a security, with entertainment. Look at this whole body that is a gift, and where all the cells work together in unison. And into this body, the whole of the universe breathes in. The breath flows in from the universe, flows out into the universe. We can neither command the breath to come, nor can we stop it when we wish. Your breath is your closest friend. Your own breath. Just watch your breathing. Try to get close to your breath. See it as the footsteps of the divine giving you life. Every breath is a blessing. Every breath is a gift. Just watch it silently in gratitude. Now take your attention to that space you see with your eyes closed. It might be dark, it might have images, it might be patterns. But try and visualize the form of some figure that is sacred to you. Some figure that is sacred to you. Try to visualize this form. If you cannot visualize, try and imagine it. And see this being as full of light, smiling at you. And each time you are breathing in, this divine light pours into your whole body and mind, filling your heart with love and compassion. Each time you are breathing in, this being of light breathes into you, filling you with love and compassion. You are here in this universe because you are loved. You are here in this universe because you are unique. There is no person who is exactly like you. Just sit for 3 or 4 minutes with this vision in your mind and your heart. Then bring your hands together in the Anjali Mudra, hands together like Namaskar. And with your eyes closed, bow down to the whole universe in your heart for giving you all the various opportunities, the gift of body, the gift of life, the gift of emotion, mind, so that you can also go on the long soul's journey towards the truth. Now bring your hands down to your knees. Get back to watching your breathing with your eyes closed. Always go back the way you came. Become aware of your physical body through which the breath moves. Listen to the sounds inside the room. The sounds outside the room. As you prepare to return to the everyday world, bringing with you that 10-minute silence and gratitude for what we have been given. And in your own heart, offer the benefits of whatever you have got now for the welfare of all living beings everywhere. Open your eyes. This is 10 minutes. You can do this 20 minutes a day. You can get 10 minutes for yourself. Because we have a servicing for our refrigerator, for the car, but we have no servicing for the heart. So, thank you very much.